I wanted to remind you the journey which we together made, coming to this point. We started describing Srimad Bhagavatam in general and what are the difficulties. It's a very difficult piece of literature with so many topics, so on and so forth. Then we, in detail, studied the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam according to Sukadeva Goswami in his description in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And then ultimately we came to this point where we are describing the essential message of every canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Every canto of Srimad Bhagavatam serves a particular role in bringing us closer to Krishna and helping us to understand ultimately the topics of Krishna Charita in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the pastimes of Lord Krishna in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, and it's not an easy topic to understand because there are so many internal impediments which precludes us from understanding the pastimes of the Lord properly and to hear pastimes of the Lord properly. The pastimes of the Lord, hearing of these pastimes is extremely powerful, but because of the deficiencies and defects of our perception, oral perception, we are not capable of experiencing these pastimes. Basically, the philosophy of Srimad Bhagavatam is that just by hearing about the Krishna's pastimes, our consciousness is transported into this realm of spiritual realm where these pastimes eternally taking place. But because of the defects of our perception, we are not experiencing it, at least in the beginning, immediately. And therefore, the preliminary cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, they serve this purpose. They are, if we study them properly and hear them properly, they're removing these obstacles, internal obstacles from our heart. And ultimately, in this way, we'll be able to provide us with the real 10th canto experience. 10th canto is not just a book. It is real life of Krishna. It's the spiritual life, full blossoming spiritual life, completely, totally, without any defects or whatever. So, as much as Srila Maharaja Pariksit, who was hearing this, he was transported into this reality, and ultimately, just by hearing this Srimad Bhagavatam, he became not self-realized, he became God-realized, and he developed his spiritual form and everything else. So that's the result, that's the proper result of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. But the preliminary cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam are very important to facilitate this understanding of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the main message of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. Without understanding them, we will not be able to understand Srimad Bhagavatam properly. And together we described the meaning of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is describing the adhikara or qualification. And the result of hearing the first canto would be complete eagerness on Srimad Bhagavatam, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, as much as Maharaja Pariksit was eager to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's the proper result if we hear the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam properly, we will understand that this is the most important activity in our whole life, in the whole existence, and nothing else will be able to distract our attention from hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in detail describes the different sadhanas, how differently, the sadhanas can be different, and ultimately it explains the glory of this bhakti sadhana in the form of hearing, shravanam and kirtanam. And the third canto, okay, we will describe it a little later, but first let me read the verse from the fourth canto, which, in my humble opinion, very beautifully summarized the essence of the fourth canto, what fourth canto is supposed to do, what is the main message of it, what it wants to tell us. Unfortunately, in my I don't know now the exact number of the verse, but I will tell you later. It's from the 29th chapter of the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, but you will be able to track it down, or I will tell you the exact verse. I didn't put the reference here exact. Okay, so let's read the verse and purport by Srila Prabhupada. It's two verses together. Yatra bhagavatā rājan sādhavo viśada-āśayāḥ bhagavad-guṇānukathana bhagavad-guṇānukathana śravaṇa-vyagra-cetasaḥ. And very important verse, tasmin mahan-mukharitā madhubhic-caritra pīyūṣa-śeṣa-saritaḥ paritaḥ sravanti taye pibanty avitṛṣo nṛpa gāḍha-karṇais tannas spṛśanty aśana-tṛḍ-bhaya-śoka-mohāḥ. Translation: My dear king, in the place where pure devotees live, following the rules and regulations, and thus purely conscious and engaged with great eagerness in hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in that place, if one gets a chance to hear the constant flow of nectar, which is exactly like waters of a river, one will forget the necessities of life, namely hunger and thirst, and become immune to all kinds of fear, lamentation, and illusion. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The cultivation of Krishna consciousness is possible where great devotees live together and constantly engaged in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. In a holy place like Vrindavana, there are many devotees constantly engaged in chanting and hearing the glories of the Lord. If one gets the chance to hear from pure devotees in such a place, allowing the constant flow of the river of nectar to come from the mouth of pure devotees, then the cultivation of Krishna consciousness becomes very easy. When one is engaged in constantly hearing the glories of the Lord, he certainly rises above the bodily conception. When one is in the bodily conception, he feels the pangs of hunger, thirst, fear, lamentation, and illusion. But when one is engaged in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, he transcends the bodily conception. The word bhagavad-guṇānukathana śravaṇa-vyagra-cetasaḥ, meaning always eager to find the place where the glories of the Lord are being heard and chanted, is significant in this verse. A businessman is always very eager to go to a place where business is transacted. Similarly, a devotee is very eager to hear from the lips of liberated devotees. As soon as one hears the glories of the Lord from the liberated devotees, he immediately becomes impregnated with Krishna consciousness. This is also confirmed in another verse. Satam prasangam mama virya samvido bhavanti hrit karnarasayana katha tadjoshanat ashvapavarga vartmani shradharatir bhaktir anukramishyati. In the association of pure devotees, the discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to ear and to the heart. By cultivation, such knowledge one gradually becomes advanced in the path of liberation and thereafter is freed and his attraction becomes fixed. The real devotion and devotional service begin. Then the real devotion and devotional service begin. In the association of pure devotees, one becomes attached to hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. In this way, one can cultivate Krishna consciousness. And as soon as this cultivation is advanced, one can become faithful to the Lord, devoted to the Lord, and attached to the Lord. And thus, one can very quickly attain full Krishna consciousness. The secret of success in the cultivation of Krishna consciousness is hearing from the right person. A Krishna conscious person is never disturbed by the bodily necessities, namely eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Guravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Antah pravishya mam vachim mam prasuptam sanjivaya takila shakti darak svadhamna anyam shahasta charana śravaṇa-vyagra-cetasaḥ pranannamo bhagavate puruṣaya tubhim svasyastu vishvasya kalah prasidatam dhyantu bhutani shivam mitodiya manascha badram bhajata tadaksha javeshyatam naumati ratvyahaitu ki. So let's continue and see how Srimad Bhagavatam works, because Srimad Bhagavatam is our best friend who is helping us to overcome very important internal difficulties. So first canto is Adhikar Tattva, second canto is Sadhana Tattva. Third canto, as we discussed already a couple of times while discussing the third canto, is talking about the very essential and primordial flow of every living entity, the desire to exploit material nature. And this desire to exploit material nature in the human society manifests as different philosophies, materialistic philosophy like Charvaka Muni or modern materialism, or scientific philosophy, which is a variation of the same Charvaka materialism, and Sankhya, and so many other philosophies, which ultimately deny that God is the cause of all causes. All these philosophies, more or less unanimous in the sense that they say that there are some other causes which are independent from the Lord. And basically, what it does, if you have this understanding, if this conception, then you will be able to exploit the material nature. For you, the material nature will become a mechanism. And because the material nature is mechanism, you're entitled to exploit it. You are higher than the mechanism, you are living entity, you have some consciousness, which is the product of matter, but it doesn't matter. That's the highest product of matter. So basically the whole idea is just to make the material nature exploitable, easily exploitable. And for that, what people do, they narrow down the conceptual horizon which they have. They have to narrow down the understanding of cause and effect. They will never be able, they will say that to say that God is the cause of all causes is unscientific. Why it is unscientific? Because we cannot see him and this and that. So the only thing which is scientific is to make this conceptual horizon very narrow. And within this framework, very narrow conceptual framework, to figure out how it works, how the mechanisms works, and exploit to your heart content the material nature. So that's basically the flow which all of us has, and the third canto is proving again and again and again and again that this is suicidal. That ultimately, if you live the life and try to exploit the material nature, it will bring about the destruction of yourself and material nature. And that's exactly what we see. You know, the scientists who achieve a lot in this material world, ultimately, their ultimate achievement is the destruction. And destruction of the source, destruction environment, and the destruction, the finer sentiments within the human beings, destruction of human culture. This is what is going on. We are witnesses. And the third canto is warning us against this. And the third canto also indicates the root cause of this mentality which breeds such philosophies. The root cause of this mentality is greed. Internal greed, the desire for enjoyment which is insatiable. You cannot satisfy or satiate your desire to enjoy. So this insatiable greed will bring about unbridled, completely unregulated exploitation of material nature, and ultimately will bring about ruination of the whole creation. So therefore the third canto very carefully drives back the point that this is not your nature. And this nature is ultimately not dead, because the Lord is behind this nature. You have to revere this nature. You have to change the exploitative spirit, the spirit of exploitation, to the spirit of worship, because this is not your nature. This is not your energy. And the Lord is completely present within the energy, and He is controlling this energy. He is the cause of all causes. So don't think that you know better than the Lord, because this is what exactly the scientists do all the time. They say, we know better. We can improve the creation of the Lord. We will make some gene, put this gene somewhere else in some other organism, and this organism will do something very wonderful. You know, I'm a scientist myself, and when I was doing my PhD degree, in the next door, in the next department of our research institution, there were people who were doing genetic engineering. At that time, it was really, you know, cutting edge. It was the really, you know, something very new. So in the table, there was a table there, and there was a big drawing in this table. And in this table, there was a mythological plant, which was the dream of those people who were doing this genetic engineering. This mythological plant, which they were, I mean, not seriously, but the idea, nevertheless, is very vividly described in this. So it had potatoes inside and strawberries on the surface. So they wanted to make a plant which would give you potatoes and strawberries at the same time. So and that's basically the idea of the whole scientific enterprise. Scientific enterprise is to improve the material nature. God is little senile. He is, you know, he has been there for too long, and you know, God knows whether God exists or not, and we definitely don't know about this. But we are scientists. We know we exist, and we will improve this creation. So a result is very destructive. All these genetically modified products, they're extremely dangerous, and God knows what else will be there. So that's the third canto. And in the third canto, I already told, but I want to remind you that there is a very important episode or clash between Hiranyaksha, who represents this approach to life. Hiranyaksha is this primordial demon who wants to exploit the material nature, and therefore the material nature goes down, 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 down. Hiranyaksha is the manifestation or allegorical manifestation of greed, human greed. And he's fighting with Varahadev. And Varahadev, as is clearly explained in the third canto, is the manifestation of Vedic sacrifice. When Varahadev appeared, all the Vedic sages started glorifying him, explaining that every part of the body of Varahadev is the representation of Vedic sacrifice. How, the bristles on his body, this and that. So he is Vedic sacrifice personified. So from this description, the wrong conclusion which we can make is that Vedic way of life is the alternative to the scientific way of life, or materialistic way of life, or exploitative way of life. It is an alternative, there is no doubt about it. It's definitely better, and Varahadev, he enjoys victory over Hiranyaksha. So, but the third canto specifically deals with the problems of the Vedic way of life, to show to us that Vedic culture, even though it's much better culture, it's not so grossly exploitive, nevertheless, it has a lot of hidden problems. And this obstacle of being enamored by the Vedic way of life is a very important obstacle, which we all may experience in our life. We can see this is basically Vedic materialism, slightly covered Vedic materialism, which has the basis in the sacrifice, but the idea is the same. I will enjoy, but enjoy in a very subtle Vedic way. I will follow the rules and regulations, I will do sacrifice, I will do this and that. So that's the alternative, and that's the internal impediment which every one of us again have. Every one of us again has. So if we overcome this, then the next idea which we will have, if we will overcome this gross materialism, then the next idea, okay, fine, there is the better way to enjoy this material world through the Vedic materialism, through Vedic sacrifices, through Vedic way of life. So that's basically the whole idea of the fourth canto, to make us understand very, very clearly that this is not an alternative. This is an alternative, but that's not the final alternative. This is not the final end. This is okay, Vedic way of life. There is nothing wrong with it unless we become attached to it, unless we declare it as the ultimate end or goal of life. And that's the mistake which many, many people do. Like now in India, there is this revival of Vedic sort of culture, and so many people, they try to, some sort of revival, they try to kind of reestablish sort of varnashrama. We can see within our society, some people, they actually place varnashrama as a Vedic way of life over bhakti. And the fourth canto, the main message of the fourth canto is that Vedic way of life is good, but it's dangerous. There are hidden dangers inside, and without bhakti, it's ultimately useless, ultimately completely useless. Only if bhakti is there, because it facilitates bhakti to a certain extent, then the Vedic way of life is acceptable and good. So that's the general message of the fourth canto, which is illustrated in many different ways, and I will try to explain now. I will try to actually be brief so that there will be some time for questions which we left unanswered last time. So the first little story, which is oftentimes goes unnoticed, but nevertheless very important story of the fourth canto, is the story of Atri Muni. When Atri Muni was performing his austerities and praying to the Lord and saying, my dear Lord, I don't know who you are, but please be born as my son, or please give me the son like you. And as a result of these prayers, three gods appeared to Atri Muni, Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu together, and they said, you know, you pray to all of us, so all of us came to you. So the first problem which is indicated by this story is the blurred, some sort of confused vision of reality due to the Vedic way of life. Ultimately, you know, Vedas, one may think, because of the Vedic way of life, because of Vedic culture and so on and so forth, that Vedas promote many gods. That's one very big problem. I remember once Shankaracharya came to Russia. I believe he was the Shankaracharya from Sringeri, no, either from Sringeri or from Rameshwaram, from one south mat. There are four main Shankaracharyas who retain the same title as the original Shankaracharya. And this Shankaracharya, he came in a yatra to promote, it was some Hindu arranged yatra, and they came to our temple. And he was very knowledgeable. He was speaking from Srimad Bhagavatam. He was quoting beautifully verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. Barhapidam natavaram karnayoh karnikaram. He was telling the story how Shukadev Goswami was attracted back by Vyasadev, sending his disciples to the forest and chanting the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, and how Shukadev Goswami heard these verses and was so attracted that he came back to ashram of Vyasadev. He gave beautiful lecture for a selected group of people. We, of course, didn't give him the chance to speak to general devotees, but nevertheless, he spoke. And then, and it was beautiful. It was all bhakti, and it was so touching to the heart. And then, when we were alone, he told me, you know what? Your Prabhupada, he cheated you. He purposefully cheated you. He said there is only one God. But we all know there are many gods. There is not one God, there is many gods. And because Prabhupada came to people from Christian background who believe in one God, he said there is one God. But ultimately there are many gods. We all know this. So that's blurred vision, this confused sort of understanding is one of the problems, very essential problems, which is inherent to Vedic culture. Vedic culture is basically breeds this sort of misconception, because ultimately the Vedic culture is how to live happily in this world by exploiting not the material nature directly, but by using different methods like sacrifices. And this is the first problem. I will enumerate 6 or 7 different problems which are inherent to this Vedic way of life, which are illustrated in this fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So next we come to this beautiful story of the conflict between Shiva and Daksha. And again, what we see in this story, we see the main topic of the fourth canto, allegorically or not allegorically, but described in the way of stories. This is the Puranic way to teach us, and the Puranic way to teach us is to tell the story. So what this story about the conflict of Shiva and Daksha is teaching us, it's again teaches us how dangerous Vedic life is, because Daksha is the greatest sacrificer. The sacrifice which he arranged was so, so amazing. All the gods were there directly. They were present right there. And the best priests were there. And the mantras were chanted so beautifully. So what was the result of this sacrifice? Complete failure. Total, complete destruction of everything, complete mess. As a result of it, Daksha, the main sacrificer, instead of becoming happy, because this whole sacrifice was to make him happy. So instead of becoming happy, he got the god's head. That was the result. So this is how alluring the Vedic life is. It says you do this in a proper tithi, and I'm sure this sacrifice was done expertly in a proper tithi, astrologically, in a very right way. And nevertheless, the result was completely inauspicious. So what does it teach us? It teaches us many, many different lessons. One lesson is that sacrifices are extremely difficult to perform, and even if you perform them perfectly, it's not clear whether they will bring the desired result or not. Not at all. And there are many such stories in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, not only this. We know that Maharaja Prithu, much more powerful personality than Daksha, he wanted to perform 100 horse sacrifices. He couldn't do it. He was trying hard. He couldn't do it. Ultimately, Lord Vishnu said, just give it up. No problem. I appeared, so all your sacrifices are successful. But the sacrifices itself, even though they're promoted as the sure means to bring about prosperity and happiness in life, ultimately bring completely different result. Another story, Maharaja Anga, the father of, maybe grandfather of Maharaja Prithu, father of Maharaja Vena, he created sacrifice, he performed sacrifice, he wanted to have good son. As a result, Vena was born. He wanted to become happy because of the sacrifice. As a result, he just renounced everything. Dhruva Maharaj, another example, for 36,000 years, Dhruva Maharaj was ruling perfectly and was performing Vedic sacrifices, 36,000 of years. What was the result? The result was that he renounced everything, went to Badarikashram, started performing austerities to purify his heart from the attachment which he developed due to this Vedic way of life. So, and of course, the last story in the fourth canto, the story of King Prachinabarhishat, is again, Narada Muni comes to King Prachinabarhishat and warns him, you want happiness? What will be the result? The result will be completely opposite, because you're killing all these animals, and by killing all these animals, nothing good will come to your life. So the difficulty, the very dangerous path of sacrifice, when we kind of stress this point and make the sacrifice as our main method of living in this world, is very beautifully depicted in this fourth canto. But not only this. This is not the worst part of the whole thing. The worst part, and actually the main message of the fourth canto, is that Vedic way of life makes you attached. And this attachment to the material life ultimately brings about many, many evils in your life, invokes many evils in your life. And if we look or again review the whole fourth canto, we will see that the fourth canto is describing this conflict between the attachment and detachment. The first story, which we already told, the second story about Shiva and Daksha. What is this? This is the conflict between the attachment and detachment. And then again, the next story when Sati wants to go to her father to attend the sacrifice, and Lord Shiva says, don't go there. And Sati says, no, but he's my father, I love him, he's nice. And I love my sisters and everyone else, and let's do something. So again, this is the conflict between attachment and detachment. And then again, Sati and Daksha, again the same conflict. And then the next story with Dhruva Maharaj, and when we see Maharaj Uttanapad, and he's attached. He's attached to Suruchi, and he's detached from Suniti. And there is a conflict internally. It's actually very important to know what it means. Also because Srimad Bhagavatam, being a Purana in Purana genre, teaches us by these stories, lessons of these stories, but also, you know, every name in Srimad Bhagavatam is important. So we can see Maharaj Uttanapada and his two wives. What are his two wives? One is Suniti. Suniti means Suniti. You follow the niti, you follow the rules, you follow the discipline. Suniti, you strictly follow the good, beautiful discipline. And another one is Suruchi. Suruchi means the good taste, you know, the taste for enjoyment. So these two wives are there. And these two wives, every one of us has within our heart. Whether we're brahmacharis or sannyasis or grihastas, it doesn't matter. We all have these two wives, Suniti and Suruchi. And Suruchi, she has the son born from her, and his name is Uttama. You know, it basically means he's the best. So the enjoyment which is given, you know, gives you the fruit, this Uttama. And of course, Suniti has another son whose name is Dhruva, which means determined, which means one who is ready to go to the end with determination and conviction. So this is what Suruchi, Suniti, if we follow niti, if we follow discipline, then we will develop this attitude or this quality of determination to come to the ultimate goal of life. So again, we can see that this attachment and detachment is depicted in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam to explain to us that ultimately we have to become detached. That if we live the Vedic way of life, even though we follow the Vedic culture properly, but if we remain attached, there is actually no benefit of it. And we can see, there is another story in this section of Srimad Bhagavatam about Dhruva, the story of Dhruva, when he became angry against Dakshas. So what is the result of this anger? Anger is the result of attachment. We all know Dhyayata Vishayan Pumsak Sangasteshu Panjayati Sangas Sanjayati Kamas Kamas Krodha Bijayate. The Krodha is coming from Kama. Kama means attachment. Kama means desire. Desire to enjoy. And even Dhruva Maharaj, who achieved the highest goal of life, he saw Lord Vishnu himself and even he became unnecessarily or inordinately angry. And another problem, which is, of course, you know, the attachment and detachment is there in the story of Maharaja Anga, who was the father of Maharaja Venu. I'm speaking, not telling the stories. I assume that you know the basic plot of Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore I don't explain the story itself, but I'm explaining the essential message which is there. And when we come to the story of Maharaja Prithu, again we see this meeting of attachment and detachment, but in a proper way. We see how Maharaja Prithu meets with the Kumaras and how he receives Kumaras. He is supposed to be an attached person. Of course, he is not attached. He is the Shakti Avesha avatar of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But nevertheless, he is playing the role of the king. But this meeting is there that there is improper conflict between attachment and detachment, as in case of Daksha and Shiva, which creates the destruction ultimately. But the fourth canto also explains that if somebody who is attached or who has the position of being attached, like householder or whatever, if he is respectful towards the renunciates, if he welcomes them and serves them and considers himself to be their menial servant, then his attachment will not bring the poisonous fruits. The attachment and detachment, when we live in this material world, we have to be attached. When we live the grihastha life, the attachment, certain attachment has to be there. But how to mitigate this attachment or the pernicious effect of this attachment by serving those people who are renounced and who are coming to our homes to deliver from these attachments. And again, the last story of the fourth canto, when Narada Muni comes to the king Prachinabarhishat, and again teaches him the same thing, and telling him the allegorical story. And this allegorical story of King Puranjana, told by Narada Muni to Prachinabarhishat, is again saying beautifully this thing, you know, how King Puranjana, even though he was the perfect Vedic culture man, he was following it perfectly. He knew astrology, he knew everything, you know, he was doing everything properly. How he became totally attached and became a woman in the next life. And how he went to forest to hunt, which basically means became sinful. So the message which the fourth canto is driving us, is bringing to us or trying to explain to us, is that don't rely on the Vedic way of life as such. It will bring attachment, attachment will bring pride, pride will bring offenses. Offenses is a very important point of the whole fourth canto. Actually, in Srimad Bhagavatam, in every canto we see description of offenses. Srimad Bhagavatam being bhakti literature, the bhakti shastri, the main bhakti grantha which we have, is warning us again and again and again against the main obstacle on the path of bhakti, which is aparad. And therefore, in every canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we can see the examples of somebody who committed some offense and the bad results of this offense. But the most amazing canto of all Srimad Bhagavatam is definitely the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which describes one offense after another offense after another offense and their bad results. You know, Suruchi offended Dhruva, And what was the result? She was burned in the fire. Not only she, her son was burned in the fire. Dhruva, of course, offended Yakshas, but that didn't have bad effects because. But in the beginning, Daksha offended Shiva. What was the result? He had the Godhead. It's not exactly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of the head of a god. This is what Daksha has become as a result of the offense. And Sati committed offense. Sati didn't follow her husband. Please mute your microphones. Sati didn't follow her husband Shiva, and as a result of this offense, she had to burn herself in the yogic fire. And then Indra committed offense against Maharaja Prithu. And then even Bhumi Devi, Prithvi, committed offense, and Prithu Maharaj was chasing her and chastising her and giving punishment to her because of her offense, of not doing her duty. So the offenses is, of course, and then at the end result, we see again the 10 sons of Maharaja Prachina Barhi, 10 prachetas, who again become angry against the trees. It's very rarely that you become angry against the trees. It basically means that there is a lot of internal anger in you. Then, any tree can become a trigger to manifest your anger. So again, that's the result of problems which are connected with this Vedic recipes, so to speak. And another very interesting and very beautiful topic of the whole fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is the religious hypocrisy. How the Vedic way of life, or following the Vedic religion, quote unquote, religion, not bhakti, because bhakti is not religion. If you follow the religion which has selfish end, which we follow because we want something for ourselves, this is the most subtle way of exploiting the energy of the Lord or the Lord himself. So how it breeds the hypocrisy. We see it in the curse and counter-curse section where the Nandishvara, as the leader of the followers of Lord Shiva, and Bhrigu Muni as the leaders of the Brahmanas who are conducting sacrifice, cursing each other and saying this is how you will be degraded, how all these followers of Lord Shiva will be degraded, and how the followers of Bhrigu Muni or Brahmanas will be degraded, how both of them will become atheistic. It's actually a very interesting lesson. And then again, we see how Lord Indra stealing the horse of Maharaja Prithu from his horse sacrifice, Ashwamedha Yagya, how he pretends himself and how he becomes the progenitor of all kinds of atheistic creeds, atheistic philosophies, atheistic religions, so to speak, in this world. So this hypocritical nature of religion is being established in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. That if you rely on the religious ritual, and the power of religious ritual, and the power of this, and you become basically ritualistic, because what is Vedic way of life? It's all kinds of rituals which you do to ensure your prosperity. then ultimately you will become hypocritical, you will become offensive, and in this way it will not bring to you what it is promised in the Vedas, and the result will be opposite. So basically this is what we see. This is the little description of the whole fourth canto, and I wanted again to reiterate the conclusions. What are the problems of Vedic way of life, of following Vedic culture? Which again, as I said, it's not a theoretical problem. Somebody may say, you know, oh, what is the Vedic way of life? We don't follow it anyway. No. There is this Vedic materialism creeps in. In ISKCON, we can see many manifestations of this Vedic materialism, this proliferation of astrology, for example. You know, I like astrology myself, I study astrology, but I know the dangers of astrology. When astrology becomes something higher than bhakti, when the sacrifices become something higher than bhakti, when anything else becomes something higher than bhakti, when varnashrama becomes higher than bhakti, varnashrama all of a sudden being the secondary principle, secondary, important but secondary principle, all of a sudden in the minds of many devotees becomes the primary idea, if not the primary message of the whole teaching of Srila Prabhupada. There are so many strange sort of misconceptions in this regard floating around, because they're there in our heart, and because people don't read the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and don't study the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam properly. The fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is supposed to remove all these problems from our understanding. So again, to reiterate, what is it? First of all, it blurs our vision of reality. It does not really concentrate us on one end. We are supposed to be ekantas. We are supposed to be concentrated on one end and basically understand that ultimate reality is one. Vadanti tattva vidastatvam yajnanam advayam. There is only one advaya gyan, only one tattva, reality, God, Supreme Lord. But then, you know, when you become Vedic, you say, yeah, everyone is okay, everyone is fine. Let's worship everyone, not forget anyone. Modi is included, you know, just in case. So this is important. This is very important message of misunderstanding. We become kind of wishy-washy, and instead of, you know, concentrating our endeavors in achieving one goals, we become all over the place, you know. And then sacrifices are very difficult to perform perfectly, and any mistake ruins the sacrifice. And even if there is no mistake, still it ruins the sacrifice. You know, even if you perform perfectly, there is no guarantee that sacrifice will bring you the desired result. As I said, Maharaja Anga performed his sacrifice. He wanted son. Yes, he got his son. And then he was lamenting that he got such a cruel and cold-hearted son, who was a demon, basically. Even though he was a nice man and he was performing good sacrifices. And ultimately, he wanted to have son because he couldn't perform sacrifices. So sacrifice is difficult. It's practically impossible to achieve desired result by performing sacrifices, even if you do everything properly. You know, I heard a story from one sannyasi about one astrologer who is a great astrologer. And he's really good, great astrologer. And he was, while doing astrology to others, he kind of on the side was doing astrology for himself. He was looking for a perfect match for himself, perfect lady who would become his ideal wife. And, screening after screening, and so many people approached him, asking him to give astrological advice. And he was collecting all the data. And in the meantime, he was matching horoscopes of different ladies with his horoscope. And ultimately, he found an amazing match. Everything was totally, completely perfect. To minutest details, everything, well, maybe little details were there because nothing is perfect in this world, but ultimately it was just amazing. He was amazed. For many years he was doing this. He was very Vedic devotee. He was not risking his life. He was not entering Grihastha ashram without proper consideration. So he did perfect match. He found the lady of his dream. He ultimately got married with her. In 2 months, it was a bloody divorce. Bloody divorce. It just didn't work. So it's basically, that's the message of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Don't rely on these Vedic rituals. You do them. We're not against Vedic rituals. Prabhupada did all this Vedic sacrifice and everything else, but this is not the ultimate. And I'm still not, I'm only talking about the negative part of the message of the fourth canto. There is a very important positive part of the fourth canto, which I will explain in a minute. So first it blurs your vision and, distracts your focus from achieving one goal because it doesn't stress the existence of one God. It concentrates your energy on performing sacrifice, which is very difficult to perform and which is not sure. The sacrifices, ultimately it creates internal and external conflicts and the spirit of competition. We can see this an example of Indra and Maharaja Prithu, how Indra became envious, Daksha became very envious, because all this opulence which is coming as a result of this Vedic way of life is ultimately feeds your competitive spirit. Does not really create humility within yourself. You want to become more prosperous and you want to show how you're performing the best sacrifices and everything else. And it creates conflicts inevitably. It inevitably, because competitiveness, this rivalry, jealousy towards others, it's not a solution, and it doesn't, therefore it's not a solution to all our problems. It creates more problems. Then it creates pride. And because of the pride, instead of creating humility, which is the proper attitude towards life, it creates pride, and because of the pride, it creates offenses. The many offenses which we mentioned, and including the offense of Maharaj Uttanapad, who couldn't stop Suruchi, and so on and so forth. It creates offenses. And then it creates attachment. It's all more or less the same thing, but not exactly. We have to know very clearly different results of this Vedic culture, so to speak. And then it also brings about, ultimately, pushes you to create some sinful activities. Like in case of Indra. Indra is a perfect, representative of Vedic culture. But because of this inherent problems of Vedic culture, because of this attachment and competitiveness, you ultimately are forced to commit sinful activities. And of course, Puranjana, the story of Maharaja Puranjana, says very clearly that he was hunting, and hunting basically means that he was doing some very sinful activities. Hunting, this is how it is. It starts nicely. It starts as a very pious alternative for life. But unfortunately, this pious alternative, if it doesn't have the foundation of bhakti, if it does not include bhakti as an integral part of this, it will become corrupt, the whole thing. So, and then it breeds religious hypocrisy and atheism, breeds all kinds of atheistic ideas in yourself. And the most important flaw of this Vedic culture, of Vedic way of life, is that it does not bring liberation. And of course, the hilarious way to explain it is to start the fourth canto from the story of Shiva and Daksha, and then to end the fourth canto with Daksha being born again. Daksha, even though he supposedly was remorseful and he was begging forgiveness, still offense was there, and he was born again with the same problems. His problems, of course, will be described in another canto, but it's not an occasion, it's not an incident that the story starts with Daksha and ends with Daksha. Daksha was not liberated, even though he was performing sacrifices and everything. And Prachetas, their whole story is also not, even though it's positive and depicted in a positive light, but nevertheless, the result of all the endeavors of Prachetas is that Daksha was born to them. So it means that some attachment was there in them. Even though they were trying to follow all the rules of the Vedic way of life and everything else. So what is the resolution? That's the problem. So far, I was only describing the problem which is explained in the fourth canto. So what is the solution? Solution is also given in the fourth canto. And this solution is given in the prayers of Dhruva Maharaj. This solution is given in the prayers of Prithu Maharaj. And this solution is also given in the prayer which I read from the end when Narada Muni is explaining the allegorical meaning of the story of King Puranjana. In all the prayers, the one important point in all these prayers in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the same important point is there. What you are supposed to do, you're supposed to live your Vedic life, you're supposed to be cultured, civilized person, you're supposed to do all these rituals, that's all fine. But at the same time, you have to have desire to hear from the mouth of devotee. If this desire is there, then all the poison which is there in the Vedic way of life will be neutralized by the nectar which is flowing from the mouth of devotees. Like Prahlad Maharaj, sorry, not Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, he says, Bhaktim muhuh pravahatam tvayame prasanga, puyahananta mahatam amalashayanam, yananja salbanam uru vyasanam bhavad bhim, nyeshye bhagavad-guṇānukathana ritapanam. This is one of the most important prayer of Dhruva Maharaj. There are 11 verses or 10 verses of his prayers. And in this prayer he says that, Bhaktim muhuh pravahatam tvayame prasanga. What I want to have in my life, Bhuyat Ananta Mahatam Amalashayanam. I want to hear Mahat. I want to hear great devotees. Because when your devotees speak, their speech is like pravāhatam. It's like pravaha, it's like flow of nectar. Bhakti muhuh pravahatam tvayame prasanga. In the association of your devotees, my consciousness will be taken by this flow which is coming from their mouths and will be brought to your lotus feet. And therefore, this is the only thing which I want. And the same thing in our verse which we read today. Tasmin mahan-mukharitā. Tasmin mahan-mukharitā madhubhic-caritra. Same thing is there. The river is flowing from the mouths of devotees. What this river does, it takes my consciousness, my individual consciousness, and purifies my individual consciousness. Therefore, I don't want to have anything else. And Prahlad Maharaj says, Yananja salbana uru vyasanam bhavadbhim. By this, by this, Anjasa ulbana uru vyasanam bhavadbhim. And this ocean of material life, there is such a great problems. Uru vyasanam. When we go through this material life, there are so many problems, all these emotional problems which we have. And actually, by the way, the whole fourth canto is describing all these emotions of attachments. Anger and grief and, frustration. All this emotional spectrum which is there, which is the main characteristic of material life, is described in the fourth canto. So Dhruva Maharaj says, Yanonja salbana uru vyasanam bhavadbhim. By this I will easily overcome all these problems, even though they are huge, like waves in the ocean. Like during the storm, the waves are huge, but very easily I will do this. And what will happen with me? Nesye bhagavad-guṇānukathana. I will just even not notice how I will be transformed or transferred into another sphere of life. From this material life, I will not even notice how I will become spiritual, because I will be intoxicated by this nectar which is flowing from your devotees. The only point is that I have to find a place where such devotees exist, and I have to hear them and again and again and again. As Prabhupada explains in the purport to the verse which we read, and which I said in the beginning, this verse is the real message of the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. The solution of all our problems is not Vedic way of life, is not following the Vedic culture properly. That we have to do. That's not a problem. But that's not an issue. The issue, the real solution to all our problems is to find a place where devotees live, and not only devotees live, real devotees live. And when the real devotees live, they always speak about Krishna. And when they speak about Krishna, everything else will be solved. What will be solved? The fear will be solved. The attachment will be solved. The hunger will be solved. The problem of thirst will be solved, as we read in this thing. There will be no bewilderment or confusion, no moha, no bhaya, no shoka, no hunger, no thirst. This is the place which we have to find. The place where there is this flow of nectar which will solve our problems in reality. If we don't find such a place, if we don't find such an association, and luckily for us we have now internet, and we can just find a proper site where there is this place when we can hear. If we don't do this, then the problems of material existence will still haunt us, will still chase after us, and we will still be fearful, we will still be immersed in grief, and we will still be bewildered. Bhaya shoka and moha will be with us, and of course hunger and thirst and mating and defending and all these four pillars of animal life, animalistic life, will rule supreme. These four pillars, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, it's a very basic instincts, and they will keep us attached to this material life, and there is only one solution to break free from this bondage of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, is to hear Krishna Katha from the mouths of devotees. So that's the real message of the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. The fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore, is very important, establishing this point, how the basically it's the refutation of Purva Mimamsa, you can say, the philosophy of Purva Mimamsa, which says that you can be happy, you don't need anything else, you just perform sacrifice, follow the Vedas very properly, and if you do follow the Vedas very properly, then you will become happy in this material world. Bhagavatam says, no, you will not become happy. If you want to become happy, you follow Vedas, no doubt about it, but please make it a point that you do it in connection with the devotees, by hearing the devotees again and again and again. Bhaktin muhuh pravahatam tvayame prasanga. Muhuh, again and again and again. Dhruva Maharaj says, I want to hear you. And Prithu Maharaj in his prayer, he says again the same thing. I don't want anything else. The only thing which I want to have millions of ears to hear how your devotees speak. And he says, when your devotees speak, then the saffron particles, because they speak by taking shelter of your lotus feet like lotus, and the saffron particles of this lotus goes into their mind, and from their mind comes from their mouths. And by coming from their mouths, the saffron particles of your lotus feet, they purify kuyogi, and they establish this kuyogi on the proper path. So again, who is kuyogi? Kuyogi is the person, bewildered person, who wanted to become a yogi, wanted to have connection with the Lord, but because of the problems of bewilderment associated with this material life, he became deviated. So how, for us kuyogis who want to reestablish our relationship with the Lord, to become reestablished, really for that we need to hear the devotees who convey the message of the Lord, or speak about this madhubhic-caritra, the beautiful pastimes of the Lord. So that's description of the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, short review of the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the structure of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, what is the essential place of this particular canto. And I'm ready to answer your questions. I'm not in a hurry. I don't know about you, but I can answer your questions. If there are some, if there is no, we can finish now.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. So we do have questions, and so let's go straight to the questions. First one, we see through the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam in various yugas, great kings and demigods involved in various sacrifices. Why do they do so, knowing the supreme position of the Lord? This is from Anupama Radharani.
Again, sacrifice. What is sacrifice? Sacrifice is, I'm staying now in an ashram where in the morning, 4 o'clock, they do long sacrifice. And the one thing which you always hear during the sacrifice, how it is, Achyutaya Namaha, Govindaya Namaha. So the main point of sacrifice is Namaha. This is the main mantra of sacrifice, Namaha or Swaha. You know, when you pour the oblations into the fire, this is the mantra which you're supposed to chant, Swaha and Namaha, and it's the same, Swaha or Namaha, the meaning is the same. There is the name of the Lord, there is a bija, Om, there is the name of the Lord in dative case, to you, I invoke Lord, I address him by his name to you, and then Namaha, I give. Sacrifice teaches us, very important thing, is that I'm not the center of the universe. That the meaning of life is sacrifice. I have to sacrifice, I have to give. So sacrifice teaches us this very important lesson that I have to give, to give, to give, to give, to give. And therefore sacrifice, but in the beginning, and Namaha means I relinquish my false ego, false identity. Swaha means the same. Swaha. Swa means me, myself. Ha means to kill. Swaha, I burn myself. I'm not for myself, I'm for the Lord. The meaning of my life is for the Lord. So therefore, the whole ritual of sacrifice is very important. The meaning of sacrifice is very important. The sacrifice is very important. Please don't misunderstand what I wanted to say. I didn't want to say that sacrifices are useless. I wanted to say that when you perform sacrifice, not with the idea to give yourself to the Lord, but with the idea to get something in return, then it's very difficult. And usually that's why people do sacrifice. This is how Vedas teach. Vedas, they say, it's very interesting, the Yaj Dhatu, I don't know if I explained it already or not, Yaj Dhatu has three meanings. The first meaning is Sangati, Yaj Sangati, the another meaning Yaj Dana, and the third meaning is Yaj Deva Puja. So Yagya is meant first of all to do Deva Puja to the Lord. The second of all, it's Dana, it means you give something. You learn how to give, you learn how to live by giving. Now we all know how to live by taking, but the sacrifice teaching us how to live by giving. And the third meaning, Yaj Sangati, means that during the sacrifice you associate with devotees who perform sacrifice, who sing beautiful bhajans. Like today I was walking in this ashram and they were doing sacrifice, and then at the end of the sacrifice they were chanting Madhurashtakam by Vallabhacharya, Madhuram Madhuram, Madhuradipatir, Akilam Rakilam Madhuram. They were glorifying sweet Lord. So the sacrifice is important because it gives us proper association, gives us all the Puranas were told over, and Mahabharata was told during sacrifice. Usually people would come and in the breaks between sacrifice, they would hear devotees speak about the Lord. So teaches us how to live by giving and teaches us to respect the Lord. So sacrifice itself is very important lesson, and everyone has to be engaged in sacrifice. We're also engaged in sacrifice. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. The Sankirtana Yagi is also sacrifice. So I was not talking about the problems of sacrifice. I was talking about sacrifice become problematic when you imply some other meaning in the sacrifice. I want to get something. I want to get a son as a result of the sacrifice. I want to become happy. I want to become wealthy as a result of this sacrifice. Then sacrifice becomes problematic because of your initial insincerity. But if you do sacrifice properly, in the proper mood, with understanding that this is, you're sacrificing your false ego in this fire of sacrifice, then it's fine. There is nothing wrong. So therefore, all the kings, they were teaching their subjects. They themselves may be pure devotees. They don't need sacrifice. But they were engaging all their subjects. They were performing these great sacrifices. People would come. People would eat prasadam, remnants of the sacrifice. And people would hear the great devotees to speak. And people would respect, gods by doing this sacrifice.
So the next question, which relates to this one is, was animal sacrifice followed in all yugas? Why is it extensively mentioned in the Vedas?
In Mahabharata, there is a very interesting story about King Uparichara-vasu. This king was a very great devotee of the Lord, and he was also a great devotee of sun god. I think sun god. And sun god gave him the vimana, the chariot. And with this vimana, he was able to travel in the space, and therefore his name was Uparichara-vasu. Uparichara-vasu, Uparichara. He is Charu, traveling Upari, up there. So once he was traveling and he saw the priests, brahmanas, and the demigods who were quarreling over this question, whether the sacrifice should involve sacrificing of the animals or not. In the Vedas it is said that you should sacrifice aja. And aja may mean goat. And the demigods, they were saying that it is very clearly said in the Vedas that goat has to be sacrificed in this particular sacrifice. But aja may also mean the rice seeds, which are the proper rice seeds, not how you say this, without husking, when the rice seed is there. So, and the brahmanas were saying, no, this is very ridiculous, why are you saying that the goats have to be sacrificed? Why do you want to have this bloody mess instead of sacrifice? Aja means seeds. And they asked this Uparichara-vasu, what is his opinion? They took him as a referee. He knew that the proper answer is that sacrifice does not mean the sacrifice of the animals. Sacrifice means the sacrifice of fruits and grains and ghee, ultimately. But because being in the moment of weakness of the heart, he kind of ruled in the favor of these animal sacrifices. And therefore he was cursed, and he ultimately went to hell and suffered for some time in the hell, but he remained a devotee, and therefore even in the hell he remained a devotee. But that's the side story. Basically, this story shows that this argument whether this animal should be sacrificed or not is a very long-standing one. And there is opinion that all the statements of the Vedas which says that you should sacrifice this animal or that animal, they are misinterpreted. Of course, Ashwamedha Yagya was there, and Ashwamedha Yagya means the Yagya of the horse, but in Ashwamedha Yagya, the horse is supposed to be walking out from the fire alive. It was just the demonstration of the efficacy of the mantras. If mantras were chanted properly, then the sacrifice, the killing of the animal would not take place. And there are so many other debates. So this debate whether the sacrifice involve animal killing or not is a long debate. And our opinion, our Vaishnava opinion, is that no, Vedas do not prescribe animal sacrifice. Vedas prescribe sacrifice of the grains and fruits and vegetables and milk products to purify the heart. And this is the corruption of the Vedic way, which I said is more or less inevitable, that ultimately Vedic way, if somebody is just following Vedas without having bhakti as a foundation for this following, that inevitably it will be corrupt. It will bring about some atheistic or deviant philosophies, deviant practices, and ultimately bring about also sinful acts.
Thank you, Maharaj. So we've got two more questions. The next one is Dinesh Prabhu. The question is, does genetic modification, is it good and is it okay according to Shastra?
Well, actually, all the modern achievements which are there, they are described in one way or another in the Shastras. And it implies that you can change your genes. Like, for example, even in Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a story of Sudyumna, who would become women, who change his gender. So this gender modification, or how to say it, transgender sort of thing is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. He would become woman and then become man again, and woman and man again. So that implies some genetic manipulations with his genes, certainly. So Vedic procedures, they imply certain modifications which may be there. But Vedas teach us how to manipulate this material nature in a wholesome way, not in an unhealthy way as the modern scientists do. But the problem with the modern science is that, as I said, it consciously narrows the horizon, the conceptual horizon, or the cause and effect relationship. It can only solve the problem where the cause and effect localized. They have to localize the cause, and by changing the cause, change the effect. What they want to change some effect, therefore they try to modify the cause, but to do this, they isolate this particular cause and effect. And by isolating this cause and effect from the broader context, they don't really know what other consequences of modification of the cause will be there. They change the cause, but the nature is designed in such a way that every cause has multiple effects. And it's involved, and in fact, the cause is an effect of something else and something else. So it's a huge, very complicated mesh, very complicated chain of cause and effects. So what scientists try to do by solving particular problem, they see a problem and an effect, they try to modify the cause, and it works. Definitely, in this cause and effect relationship, everything works. But the problem is that they don't know what else happens at the same time. Like, recently I had to take antibiotics, I had to take. And they worked wonder. I was trying to solve the problem by some other way, but I couldn't solve the problem by some other way. So I had to take antibiotic. Within 3 days, my problem was solved completely. But unfortunately, there was another problem. I had a problem, some infection in one place, and because of taking antibiotics, I was infected all over the body. My whole body was rushing, and it was the allergy was all over the place. So this is the price which I had to pay for this solving this problem in a scientific way. So that's the problem, that science cannot deal with complicated systems. Science simplifies the system and then deals with the consequences. And then, of course, when I said to the doctor, what shall I do? They said, oh, I take another medicine. And I said, if I take another medicine, will be some other side effect. They said, yes, of course, there will be some, but there is medicine for this other side effect, no problem. So for every side effect, there is a solution which creates some other side effect. Because of this approach, general approach. Therefore, the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam gives the broadest approach by which you can understand or see how the local approach can also be solved. Like, unfortunately, more holistic systems which deal with the system as a whole, not with the particular cause and effect relationship, they are more or less lost. Like Ayurvedic system is more holistic. It's interesting, again, what the modern medicine does. The modern medicine purifies one substance. And this one substance, it's usually, if you see the description of any allopathic medicine, you will see that this is a very simple molecule. Simple or not so simple, but it's one substance. And this one substance, it's very effective, and they know how it, modifies certain things, how it interacts with certain receptors, for example, receptors in the brain or receptors in a cell. So it's one substance. When we take Ayurvedic medicine or any other holistic medicine, we see it's a very complicated stuff. There are many, many substances, and there is probably one main substance or a few main substances which are there, which affect, and some other substances need to be there to counteract the side effects, because they're using the complicated thing by affecting the two complicated systems interact with each other. To correct one complicated system or complex system, to correct one complex system, you need another complex system, because only in this way the correction can become proper. But scientists cannot do this. They cannot figure it out. Therefore, they try to correct complex system with a simple system. And by correcting the complex system with the simple system, they create so many other problems. And therefore, this is what happened. And the same with genetic engineering. They solve some problem, but they create so many other problems. Because again, they only deal with very simple understanding without trying to understand the you know, and to understand how the complex system interact with each other, you need revelation. If you take any Vedic discipline, whether it is Ayurveda or yoga or whatever it is, the knowledge which is behind this, it's not akshaja knowledge, it's not pratyaksha knowledge, it's not the knowledge of our senses, which is limited, which is always imperfect. It's yogaja knowledge. In Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he speaks about two kinds of knowledge. One is pratyaksha, the knowledge which you derive from the senses, or experiential knowledge, which the scientists, you know, deal with. And yogaja is the knowledge which you get through meditation. If you purify your mind and you meditate on a certain object, this object becomes one with your mind. And you study the object not in outside world, when you cannot study it properly, but you study the exact and proper replica of the object within your mind through the meditation. And this information which is you derive from this process is much more complete and much more wholesome and gives you amazing results. So, you know, all the fathers of Ayurveda, they just say that this is the herb for this sort of problem or disease, but they never say, there was no laboratories at that time. They didn't do experiments. How did they do? Actually, Ayurveda itself describes, they would go to the forest and they would start speaking with the different herbs. You know, the herb would tell them, I am for this and I am for that, and, you know, this is yogaja knowledge. So, and if scientists become yogis and learn this art or science, how to get the knowledge from meditation, from yoga, then maybe they will be able to do some genetic manipulation. Otherwise, better they just don't do anything. Better they just retire. It only creates harm.
Thank you so very much, Maharaj. The last question is...
there was questions from the last time. You know, you mentioned that Radha Pramod wanted to ask something.
What happens is, yeah, so you'll try to get those questions out, and till that happens, we'll ask these two questions.
Okay.
One is how to avoid offenses to devotees, and how to find the place of real devotees.
Yeah, you just hear. You know, you can recognize devotees not by seeing, because who we are to see. There is some sort of haughtiness in when we try to judge the level of advancement of a devotee just by seeing him or by using your own discrimination. You just hear and see how your heart reacts. You know, if you hear and the hearing process inspires you, this inspiration is the indication that this is what you need, what your heart needs. It's like Maharaja Parikshit. He was hearing Shukadev Goswami again and again and again, and he says that I don't have any worries, I don't have any fears, I'm not fearful of this Takshaka snake, and I don't have hunger and thirst. So if you hear somebody and you can hear him again and again and again without being satiated, this is the place where we should strive for. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, by commenting on this verse which we read, he says, you know, if you find devotees who just, you know, who says, oh, fire on me, I slept so long today and I missed Bhagavatam class, and what shall I do? But now they describe the qualities of the Lord, let me run there. You know, if you find devotees who live there with such an eagerness to hear, then you have to run to this place and stay with this place where the rivers of nectar flow, because the rivers will start flowing from the mouths of devotees only when they feel the eagerness to hear. It's not just the devotee who speaks need to be there. The devotee who wants to hear need to be there. When this combination is there, then the proper place where, as Prabhupada says, where we can practice Krishna consciousness very easily without any problems, this is the proper place where we can do this. So that's answering the last question. In the meantime, I forget what was the beginning in this question. Yeah, how to avoid offenses. Basically, again, if you hear in a proper mood, you know, what does it mean to avoid offenses? To avoid offenses means to avoid pride, to cultivate humility. You know, when somebody, I have seen many people, unfortunately, not many, but few people, but quite a few people, who were reading a lot of books, and by reading a lot of books, they became very offensive. And we know unfortunate stories from Prabhupada's life and his disciples who were very knowledgeable, were reading books, knowing Sanskrit and this and that, and ultimately would become very offensive to Prabhupada. So the root cause of offense is pride. Or self-reliance, when we rely on our own ability to understand Shastra, when we're fixed, and therefore, actually this first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is there. The first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is the remedy from this, from the offensive mentality, because if we read properly, we will develop this eagerness to hear, and being a hearer is a humble position. You know, if we're eager to hear, it is a manifestation of humility. If we are eager to speak, it may not be, it's not necessarily a manifestation of pride. We may speak in a service attitude, as Sukadeva Goswami was speaking. But there is certain devotees, perhaps you have seen them, who become very morose when they have to hear somebody, but when they themselves speak, they become very enthusiastic, and you know, if they lead the kirtan, they're very enthusiastic. If somebody else lead the kirtan, they're much less enthusiastic. So, you know, to develop humility, you have to develop attachment to hear. This is one recommendation. Of course, in general, we have to become humble. We have to accept spiritual master, and always consider oneself as a fool. You know, who am I? I am speaking this theoretical knowledge. What do I understand in reality? I don't understand anything. So my only way to understand this difficult subject matters, spiritual subject matters, which reflect the spiritual reality, is to serve my spiritual master. If this attitude is there, then it's a good antidote against offenses.
Thank you. The next question is the importance of matching horoscopes. Is really important for the purposes of marriage, since we have
It is. It is
amongst devotees in particular.
It is very important. we should not neglect. Again, the point of my lecture was not to neglect Vedic culture, Varnashrama culture with all the details and matching horoscopes in Varnashrama culture is one of the details of Varnashrama culture, of proper matching of the marriages. My whole point of the lecture was not to denigrate this great culture. It's our culture. We should follow this culture. It's important culture. The problem is that we should not elevate the details of this culture over the essential principle of this culture, which is bhakti. And we should put everything into proper perspective. Bhakti is the main principle. Everything else is subsidiary. So in one sense, bhakti is subsidiary. And if you have two pure devotees and they somehow or other by some freak or by some good fortune want to live together, then matching is maybe not important. But I believe there will be difficulties even in this case. Because, yeah, of course, if they don't have material mind, then there will be no friction between the material mind. But what is matching? Matching is the matching of the minds, mostly matching of the minds. And if the minds match together, then it's easy. Then there is no undue problems in the material relationship which we have. But if they don't match, what will happen, you know, somebody will say something and it will be misinterpreted by somebody, by the husband or by the wife, and there will be just endless chain of misunderstandings, and ultimately it will come to the point when you will just hate each other because of this too intimate or too close connection which is mismatch. It will be difficult. It's like, you know, mind is material. You know, you try to ignite the fire and at the same time pour water there. Fire and water, they don't match with each other, and therefore there always will be smoke. If you don't match your chart, the other thing is that it's not the only consideration. Matching of the horoscopes is only part of the matching, and you have to have a proper astrologer who will tell you how to do this. But there are some other considerations. You have to see that your background is similar. Like in Vedic culture, it was very important that the people from the same caste would marry each other. Why? Because their value system was the same. You may have, by some coincident, horoscopes which match, but because people from different backgrounds, their value system will not match. You know, if somebody, why it is not recommended to have intercaste marriage, these mixed marriages, especially pratiloma marriages, when the wife is from the higher caste than the husband, because their value system is different. So if you try to match, for example, you know, boy who is a Brahmana with girl who is Vaishya by nature, it will be very difficult because he is detached and he wants to study and she wants to have a luxurious life with all kinds of facilities. It will be very difficult. So it's just a common sense to do matching. But, you know, matching is not only according to the chart, but according to the, in general, the background and so many other considerations are there. So it's important part. I myself personally saw recently some marriage which totally broke, which was arranged marriage by very traditional Indian people, but they neglect matching the horoscopes, and ultimately the boy and girl almost killed each other. So bad it was. Okay. Thank you.
again.
Hare Krishna.